What if there is a world where technological advances in imaging, remote digital solutions, and trusted monitoring align to achieve cost-effective expert care? That was the vision of today's guest and his partners. Today, we'll take a look at a comprehensive digital orthodontic platform that offers teeth straightening solutions with remote monitoring. Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of Ortho Thrive. I'm your host, Richie Gerzon. Today we have Dr. Adam Schulhof joining us. Adam is the CEO and founder of Grin, a New York-based company that enables remote monitoring of orthodontic patients' progress between in-person visits. Adam has over 2 decades of experience in the orthodontic industry. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So why don't you just start us by telling us a little bit more about your background, experience, and kind of how you got to where you are today?
Great. Awesome, huge, open-ended question. I'm actually an orthodontist, or like I say, I play one on TV, right? And so, throughout my young orthodontic career, I would say, well, let me backtrack a little. So I went to UMDNJ. Back in the day, it was called University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey. Right. Today, they call it Rutgers Dental School. So I'm getting a lot of stuff from Rutgers telling me that I'm an alumnus, and I've never stepped foot into Rutgers at all. But after my dental school program, I got into Columbia University for my orthodontic residency.
Gotcha.
Right. And the reason I give this background is because I was in Columbia from 2000 to 2002. And that was a very critical period in orthodontics because that's exactly when Align technology came to market. Right.
Interesting. Yeah.
So while I was at Columbia, suddenly we start hearing this buzz about these clear aligners that are hitting the market. And, we started testing them out a little bit. And the interesting thing there for me as a young orthodontic resident was, okay, so within a year or so, I am getting out into the real world. I am living in the New York City tri-state area, crazy competitive area, as you can imagine. At the time, I was working for an orthodontist who he and I decided together that it would be best if I did not continue working for him once I was an orthodontist. Okay. It was the best advice I could ever get, or the most perfect breakup. It was really more, it's you, it's not me. He said, Adam, you have all of these ideas about what you want to do, how you want your practice to be. And to be honest, I'm just an orthodontist that has been doing these things this way for 20 years. I'm going to continue doing it this way. I think you're going to be crazy successful, but you should probably start up from scratch on your own. And so here I am.
At least he was honest about it. I mean, it's nice.
Not just honest. Yeah. I think it was, it's always good when somebody that's close to you and knows you well holds up that mirror and has you really okay, realize who you are, and what you want. And, like every orthodontic residence, you're thinking about your next step. And what am I going to do? Am I going to get a job? Am I going to associate? Am I going to work for corporate? Am I going to open up my own from scratch? What does that mean? It's quite daunting. But as I was thinking those things through and really leaning towards exactly what he had mentioned, hey, you should probably open something from scratch. I'm thinking about, okay, opening up something from scratch in this neighborhood, in other words, New York City, where, it's like everybody talks when we get to a conference, everybody's like, okay, well, in 5 square miles, I have X orthodontists around me, right? And in New York City, you're like, in my building, on my floor, I have X orthodontists.
Seriously? Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's funny. I had a practice in New York City. I've sold it since, but I had a practice on East 69th and on the east side. And I was there for a number of years. In my second year there, I got a second opinion that came in with a set of records. And it was a doctor that I had never heard of before. And I look at the address, and my address was like 125, and this was 123. And I'm like,
and you'd never heard of them?
Something's wrong here, right? Because they were in a building next door, and it turns out that they had been renting space from the general dentist. So I knew the GP existed, right? So it's like that's a perfect way to describe New York City. I did not know that there was an orthodontist next door to me. But all good. So, young resident thinking about next steps, very, very congested market. Invisalign had just come to the market. And so I was really thinking about, okay, how can I potentially do something that's a little bit different than everybody else in the building, on the floor, and what I was looking at with Align Technology and what they were doing at the time, going back 20 years, orthodontists hated Align Technology. Let's put it
I
that
bet
way.
they did. Yeah.
But even before the whole general dentist thing or anything like that, really, because the appliance did not work. Now, not Align's fault, not orthodontist's fault, probably a little bit of both. We just didn't understand at the time how to move teeth with plastic, right?
Gotcha.
And so we needed to get over that hump. And honestly, we needed a good kick in the ass to get over that hump. And that ultimately was the patients banging on the door saying, I want this, right? But what I was looking at, this is back when I was still in residency, was, all right, Align's coming to the market with all these new fangled devices, right? Cosmetic, aesthetic, orthodontics for the first time. And I was starting to see adult patients trickle into the clinic at Columbia, to the likes of which we had not seen before, right? Think about the 1990s, right? What percentage of your practice was kids and adolescents versus adults versus today? And so when I went out into the real world, so to speak, I decided to differentiate my practice by really actually targeting that side of the market.
Really? That's a bold move then. Huh?
So bold, scary, stupid. I mean, I had been told all of it. My mentors at Columbia were like, are you insane? So you're telling us that you're going to go after 5% of the market now, right? And, to me, it was really, I understood what was happening to the market. I knew that aesthetics, ceramic brackets were now 20 years old at that point, right? Ceramic had come out in the 80s,
really?
The early 2000s, yeah. And, but I understood that there was this huge unmet need and unmet market. And I could fight, so this is now, there's been books written about blue ocean strategy. You may have heard of that, right? Blue ocean versus red ocean, right? Another great, phenomenal ortho CEO, John Pham, he, as soon as we had our first conversation, he sent me blue ocean strategy in the mail. And I'm like, this is exactly what I've been talking about for years. I just didn't know to call it blue ocean strategy, but it's really, do you want to, really fight in those bloody, dirty waters with all the other sharks out there, or do you want to have clear sailing in your own blue ocean where you create that market, right? And so scary, yes, but at the same time, it was probably timed well, thankfully. I got lucky, and I was able to really ride that wave of Align Technology starting to market to consumers, to tell specifically the adult population, we can straighten your teeth, and it doesn't have to look like you're 16 years old with metal brackets, railroad tracks, right across your teeth. And my practice was right there to be able to pick up all of that. We didn't just do aligner therapy. I also did take a lot of time to learn lingual orthodontics, because again, going back to these early days, it was very difficult to understand how to move a tooth with plastic aligners, right?
So that allows you to still target adults without having to look like that 16-year-old.
Exactly. I really needed to have the right kind of tools where it wasn't just patients walk through my door and I can make them happy by using an appliance that was aesthetic, but I needed to make myself happy and know that I can get to the result that really they were expecting me to get to. So, my practice turned very quickly into aligners and lingual orthodontics, very, very adult centric, and then took off, thankfully, and grew from there. And the reason I talk about this as kind of like the beginnings is really because I think that really proved to me that I was on the right track with looking at the market, not where it was today, but where it's going towards the future, right? So when we start talking about, what we've done with Grin and why we've done it with Grin, et cetera, we started out, my team came together a year and a half before COVID. It had nothing to do with COVID. We were really looking at what consumers were looking for in the market today, in all markets, right? And we were like, we've got all of these great new innovative technologies in orthodontics in regard to the appliances that are used to move teeth. But we really haven't innovated in the patient journey, right? The patients were still coming through practices at a relatively similar cadence to what they've been doing over the last 50 years.
Yeah, that's true.
Doctors were still treating patients, even with all these amazing tools that increase all of these efficiencies. We really weren't maximizing those efficiencies.
So you're thinking about this right before COVID, and then Of course,
So
COVID hit. And
Grin was actually, so the way that all happened. So as I mentioned, I built this lingual and clear aligner practice. At the time, probably going back to 2005 to 2010, what I was using on the lingual side was Incognito. 3M had purchased Incognito. I started being utilized to lecture all over the world and teach Incognito to doctors, all over the place. And so as I'm traveling the world and lecturing about all of these things, fast forward to 2015, we all know that direct-to-consumer aligners started really hitting the market, right? And so I have this practice in New York City, and the first scan shop for the most prominent DTC company was opened up in Soho in New York City, as you probably know, right?
Yeah.
So, and I always felt it's interesting because these companies always talk about access to care, and yet this first scan shop is on the most expensive block of real estate.
Right.
Like, on that street, any other shops I can't even afford as an orthodontist to shop in, right? But access to care, let's put a scan shop right over there, right? But having this adult-oriented practice in New York City, and we were obviously doing a lot of marketing for it as well. And then suddenly this DTC company opens up their first scan shop, starts running patients through their system. Of course, many of these patients are failing, and patients are going back online and typing in adult orthodontics, New York City, and many of them ended up in my chair, right?
Nice, yeah.
And so the way that all came to be, kind of to take us to the Grin story, was as these patients started coming through my chair, on a given day in New York, I was seeing probably about 9 to 10 new patient consults.
Okay.
And there was a time period where I think it was like 3 or 4 days that I was in New York consecutively. A majority of the patients, so like 7 out of 9 coming through the door, new patient consults, were going through or had gone through this DTC treatment with
7 out of 9.
It was insane. I believe one of the days it was even 9 out of 9. And I was like turning to my team and each one going like, oh my God, what the heck is happening over here, right? And it was
talk about the market, like giving you a little hint, right?
Well, that's the interesting part, right? So I kind of looked at it the same way I did when I first got out of Columbia. And I said, okay, so every orthodontist in the world is getting up on their soapbox, beating our chests and saying, this is horrible, this is malpractice, we need, regulatory involved. I was looking at it from the flip side of it. And I was like, okay, so here I am and I'm a consumer. What the hell is going through my mind that I decide I'm going to try to straighten my teeth myself, basically, from home? That doesn't make sense to me because I'm an orthodontist, but let me talk to these consumers that just went through it, right? And so every single one of these patients that walked through the door, obviously we threw them some kind of discount, but I said, but I need to pick your brain. I want you to, answer some questions for me about the process, obviously, but about what was really going through your mind as all this happened. And the interesting thing that we found with our little, targeted micro research was that cost was not even the top factor, right? You'd think right away, okay, it's cost, right? Or even the fact that it's transparent pricing, which in orthodontics does not really exist, but actually convenience beat out cost. I remember having this conversation with an ER physician sitting in the chair, and I'm like, dude, you're a doctor. What are you doing, right? I get the whole thing that every new startup wants to circumvent the supply channel and disrupt the industry. But in healthcare, if you're circumventing the doctor, it is not anymore healthcare. And he looked at me and he's like, you're right. I should have known better. But all I was thinking was, I don't have the time to come to an orthodontist every 4 weeks. There's no way, given my adult schedule, doc, I love you, he said, but I don't want to come see you every 4 weeks, right?
Yeah.
So very quickly, I understood that we as a specialty need to think about things a lot differently. And as I was doing some of that lecturing around the world, I would take a portion of my lecture. And I kind of segmented and I called it #TakeBackTheSpecialty. And whether it was here in the United States or even abroad, I would talk about what's been happening, the market trends, what's been happening with DTC. At the time when I was presenting this in Asia or in Europe, they looked at me like I had 5 heads. They're like, it can't be. I'm like, go Google right now these companies. And they all did. And they were like, oh my God, what is happening over there, right?
Really?
I'm like,
okay.
It's happening here. It's going to be happening here too. Generally, the trend that I found within our world is that there's a 5-year lag, but whatever happens here 5 years later, it's happening in Europe, happening in Asia.
Interesting. Okay.
And so I would talk to all these doctors about it, but really have them understand, or try to have them understand, the mindset of the patients, of the consumers, right? And my hope was that if orthodontists understood what consumers are looking for, we do a lot of these things. Back in the day when I was doing a ton of incognito on patients from around the world, they would fly in to New York to see me. I would have them on WhatsApp video or FaceTime, and therefore I was able to stretch out their appointments, and I would kind of do these virtuals. They weren't great because I couldn't quite get into their mouth, but at least it was somewhat helpful. But we never advertised that, right? Because that was just, okay, for this particular patient. But the reality is if consumers are looking for this, what I was trying to get out through network effects was explain to orthodontists, not just in the US, but around the world, that patients are no longer just patients. They are consumers, right? If I said that 10 years ago, every dental society would throw me out, right? But the reality today, we all know very well now the consumerization of healthcare is happening. Patients and consumers want everything at their fingertips. They want it on their timeline. And the reality is we're in the service industry. And as we were back in 2015, 2016, 2017, these companies were eating our lunch, so to speak, at least in the big cities, where my new patient exams were down if I considered patients that did not go through these direct to consumer companies, right? Like I said, 7 out of 9, 9 out of 9. And so I realized we need to get the word out there, right? And that to me was the way we were going to fight this, where if all of the orthodontists that were listening to this started, just small changes, network effects, where we were getting out to the market that what these DTC companies are claiming orthodontics is, that's not what orthodontics is. Your local orthodontist has all of these capabilities, and we just need to get that out to the consumers so they can understand that. And so I was specifically lecturing in Israel at the time. And these two gentlemen approached me after my lecture, and they're like, Adam, why is it that you're understanding the market and everybody else in this room is just scratching their head? And I'm like, who are you guys? So it turned out that these two guys were from the startup world, Israel, Tel Aviv, startup nation. And one of them had just sold his first startup to Medtronic, a very, big medical device company. And he was looking for his next gig. And he was looking specifically in the dental industry. And he was thinking about bringing a similar model to these DTC models to Europe. And I was like, no, you're not going to do this. If you really want to disrupt the market, but do it responsibly, because this is healthcare, let's talk about how we can get that done and how we can do it better and disrupt the disruptors and bring true responsible disruption that really is going to create value for doctors and patients. And that was really where Grin was born, right there outside of Tel Aviv in Israel.
And so we're coming back to how it was born.
Exactly,
I like this. Okay.
Exactly. The story all intertwines. There's a reason for all of this. But that's really how it was born. After I came back home from Israel, we kept in touch, and just our weekly calls turned into nightly calls, turned into, okay, we've got to implement, we've got to take action, we've got to build some technology around this so that we can get out there to the market and make the market understand that the things that consumers are looking for, transparent pricing, lower pricing, and convenience most of all, right? This new age of how consumers want to be treated and journey through treatment, we can do that partnered together with local orthodontists. You don't have to take the doctor out of the picture for that to occur.
I definitely agree. So when all of this started, you're saying it happened shortly before COVID. And then, of course, teledentistry during that time just became much more accepted, or just telemedicine in general. How did that affect all of your plans? Did it help, hurt? Did it have no effect?
No, it definitely did. So we got the company together. We started building business model, started talking about the technology, building an innovation team out in Tel Aviv with developers, data scientists, et cetera. And that was over a year before COVID, right? Yeah. And so we're building all of these things. And the goal was to go live with a pilot where we started, with a couple of strategic doctors across the United States, taking the patient through the full Grin journey, beginning to end.
Yes.
And we had planned on starting, and this is not a joke, March 15th of 2020.
Oh, literally even the middle of March too. Perfect.
Literally,
okay.
yeah, it was March. That was the go date. And we had the doctors lined up, we had the patients lined up, we had everything lined up, and then boom, shutdown, right? And
Wow.
with our model, we absolutely understand that touch point appointments are absolutely necessary, right? You've got to do a real oral exam, you've got to get an x-ray of your patient, but using our technology, instead of the patient needing to come through the practice 15 to 20 times, they can come through the practice from anywhere from 3 to 7 times, depending on the severity of treatment. But now they couldn't come in at all. And it was an interesting first week of COVID where we were like, oh my God, what's going on? Just like everybody in the rest of the world, including
the unknown was the worst part back then.
Exactly. And, and I still, so at the time I'd already sold my New York City practice. I have a practice in New Jersey as well.
Okay.
And so my patients weren't able to get it. And over that first week, I started having patients call and say, I've got something going on. I really need you to take a look. And we didn't even know what we were allowed to do. If you remember those early days, we didn't even understand what was considered an emergent situation enough for me to actually go in and look at a patient. Everybody was just like, you can't do anything. and I started thinking about this, and I turned to my team and I'm like, guys, I know we only have an initial prototype of the Grin scope, but we need to get this in the hands of patients and doctors right now.
Yeah, you need some data. You need to know when emergency is really an emergency, right?
Exactly. And in orthodontics, how many real emergencies are there? You can talk a patient through anything as long as you can communicate with them the right way, see what's really going on, and then show them. And so I have to give my team credit. We literally went from prototype to manufacturing, obviously some more engineering, and then regulatory. I mean, you probably know what regulatory takes in the United States to get through regulatory. And we went through all of that in a matter of months. And we partnered with 3M, and we created what we called the COVID initiative and sent out 3,000 scopes to the market for free. Just as guys, we know that we're all in this together. We know that there are patients that unfortunately, need help right now, and orthodontists need to be able to see into their mouths and see what's going on. Here you go. And
that's amazing that you could get any of that done, considering so many people were either off work, working remotely. It involved the supply chain and manufacturing and that's pretty crazy.
Done remotely, everything over Zoom. I mean, I think I went through 3 chairs until I found one that I can actually even survive the day in, right? Because it was all day from 6 a.m. to really late at night. We were dealing with Israel. We were dealing with overseas. We were dealing with...
Oh, you're dealing with different time zones? Oh, that would be tough. I mean, that was when I first realized I could get mentally too tired to be on Zoom. Like I'd never really experienced that. I thought it was just easy, but it's hard after about 5 hours, 6 hours of it.
And think about it from my perspective and from all of my colleagues' perspective as orthodontists, we're on our feet constantly throughout the day. We don't know how to sit in front of a computer for any given time, right? The longest we sit in front of our computers for like 3 minutes to do like a clean check and then up and at them and go see some patients, right? So to sit in one place for a given period of time, ouch.
Yeah, no doubt. I was glad I already had a stand-up desk, and I definitely appreciated it during that whole time because I would just, I got to stand up. All right. So do you think in general, there's just going to be a decline in like physical visits in orthodontists and that whole patient journey? Is that the trend? Is it good?
So
bad?
Here's the interesting thing. Even as I mentioned, we were building this out even before COVID, and we've done a lot of market research. We've talked to patients, we've talked to moms, right? So even imagine in the days pre-COVID. So let's set COVID aside for a second.
Yeah,
it definitely impacted us, right? And impacted the market. But as much as moms love coming to see you, they don't love coming to see you. And the funny thing is, we pride ourselves sometimes in getting a kid in and out of the chair fast, right? So the kid comes in, we're like, okay, let's change that wire and let's, change her colors and get her up. And in 6 minutes, patient is done. And we almost, as a badge of honor, say, look, mom, we did it so fast. And the moms are just looking at us like, so I had to get all the kids together. I had to find their shoes. I had to sit through traffic. I had to find parking outside your office, which, and all for 6 minutes, really? So there is a very strong reality that I think orthodontists don't tune into sometimes about the fact that if as much as patients love us and they love coming to our office, and we prided ourselves as trying to create this oasis for the mom throughout her day when she's down in the office, with the coffee and the Otis Spunkmeyer cookies and all of the other stuff that us orthodontists do these days or before COVID. But if you could turn to mom and say, hey, what if I can save you 30% of visits throughout treatment, right? And this is exactly what we went out and asked moms. They were like, I would pay more money for that.
They said that? No, no one, I haven't heard anyone actually say that. Okay.
Here's the funny thing. In my practice now, obviously we use Grin on every single patient that walks through the door. And when we present our treatment plan originally during that first consultation visit, we absolutely present Grin and how it's going to work and what it's going to do for the moms. We have not just one or two, we have a majority of moms say, that is so amazing, that is so cool. How much more is that?
And they just assume it's more.
They just assume it's more because you're giving them this piece of technology. You're giving them an app for their device, right? You're giving them a piece of hardware. So in their minds, this is something that adds a ton of value to the treatment. And we're like, no charge. This is going to be fantastic for you. It's going to be great for us. It's actually going to give us the ability to check on little Johnny's hygiene even better. It's going to give us the ability to make sure that somebody from the practice is watching so that you don't have to be monitoring elastic wear because we've got that covered, right? I mean, there's just so much value here beyond even just the saved visits. You mean, I don't have to come in every 4, 6, 8 weeks?
Yes.
Phenomenal, right? So yeah, ton of value. So even pre-COVID, moms get this. Patients, especially adult patients, certainly get it because every time they come in to see us, it's a morning off of work, right? So this is all value. And I think, and it depends on the geography, but in New York, I never realized this, but I have doctors out in Arizona that tell me most of my patients' parents are on hourly wages. And in order for them to bring their children into the practice, forgetting about costing them their hourly wages, many times their bosses will say, oh, if you need to do that, just take the day. And they don't pay them for that day. So now you're talking about the cost. Yes. And this happens across a huge swath of the United States, right? Depending on the geography. And so imagine for a second that, as a parent on that kind of budget, you're scraping together the means to get your child through braces, but then you're also losing your income every time you have to take your child in to see the orthodontist.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've been an entrepreneur for long enough now. I've almost forgotten what it's like, but that absolutely stinks, man. Losing money on both ends and your time. Oh. So it's really nice to have a new technology where the perceived value is obvious. So and increases the value of your service. It's making the office more efficient, obviously, because there's less visits. I mean, those are really good features. So what would you say to doctors who are kind of hesitant to adopt new technologies? Because it seems like a trend in their industry.
So, so this is where COVID, it was good because it gave some of those doctors a kick in the ass, right? But let's be realistic. There, in every industry, you have this. And it's funny that in healthcare, you probably have it more because doctors generally, if you think about it, top of their class, A students, right? Yeah. And in order to achieve that, they were always thinking inside the box because if you know the inside
that's
of the
interesting
box perfectly, right? Mm-hmm. You're an A student. And so to even get them to do something slightly off from inside that box is a tough thing to do. And this is something that, when I, as the CEO of Grin, went to VCs and we're talking to them about, orthodontic adoption of this, they were like, oh, we hate dealing with doctors or convicting them of anything. Doctors are the
Do they really say that? Oh,
okay. They absolutely do. They absolutely
do.
Do.
Y'all have a reputation. Okay.
We absolutely do. But you know what? I feel like, and this is at least how I sold it to the VC. I think it's true. Orthodontists are at least a lot more accepting than general doctors, right? Because we deal with innovation all day long. Because think about what's happened over the last 20 years, right? Clear aligners, digital orthodontics, custom prescriptions, nickel titanium arch wires, if we're going back a little farther, right? All of these things were new technologies that, really, really left orthodontics, ahead by years. So You're right. There are some doctors that are like, this is the way I run my practice. I'm happy to do so. I think that when we're dealing with remote monitoring, for example, there is a little bit of a shift in mindset because orthodontists like being hands-on. I have to control, right? But
we hear control. That's been a theme in a few of our episodes.
There we go.
I love it. So I totally empathize.
But the reality is that if you talk to orthodontists and say, how many times have you had a patient that didn't show up for a visit or two, and now they're X months out of treatment and they sit back down in the chair, and if nothing was broken, you're looking at them and you're like, wow, like this case looks amazing.
Yeah.
I haven't touched it in 3 months. It looks so good, right? Because when you think about some of these newer technologies that we've employed on the appliance side, so let's talk about like nickel titanium wires for a second. These nickel titanium wires work their way out. And a lot of the times, unfortunately, we get in our own way and we get in the mouth and we're like, okay, let's change to the next wire. But had we let that wire cook and really perform and maximize the efficiency of that wire, we would actually have a better result, right? So we get in our own way. And this is what I was talking about in the beginning, how unfortunately we have all of these new tools, but we're still treating patients with the same old patient journey that we always did, much to our own chagrin. Like we're almost not realizing the efficiencies inherent in some of these tools. And remote monitoring allows that to happen, right? When we think about clear aligners, for example, clear aligners are staged. And if you've done your work well on the front end of it, and you've planned this case correctly, okay, technically, now this doesn't ever happen, but technically, if that patient is wearing their aligners, if they have all of their aligners, they should go from beginning to end and get at least between third base and home, right?
Yeah.
But what ends up happening is a lot of patients, they're not wearing it so well this week or that week or that week. So now input remote monitoring. Don't get them back in your chair and waste your chair time where you're looking and say, yeah, it looks great. Goodbye, right? And
absolutely,
now
right.
For this, I wasted an hour of my day, right? But now you're actually looking at them, or somebody in your practice is looking at them more frequently to make certain that every step of the way, they're doing what they need to do so that things are tracking properly. And anecdotally, right, we haven't put the real numbers on paper yet, but anecdotally, our doctors are actually showing less refinements because they're watching these patients along the way and they're not getting them in the office at all, right? Because they're taking now the technology, the clear aligners, they're maximizing the efficiencies because, hey, we know that you're paying a lot more as a doctor from an overhead perspective, from an appliance perspective for clear aligners than you are for brackets and wires. So why does it make sense? Well, it makes sense because there are efficiencies with clear aligners. Well, you need to realize those efficiencies in order to realize that added overhead, right? And that's what absolutely. Remote monitoring allows you to do. So it's not just that remote monitoring is going to do a ton of great things for your practice, which it does. But aside from that, it's actually giving you the power to realize the efficiencies in the devices, the appliances that are all extra cost to your practice that you already employ.
Yeah, so you're really bringing them to their maximum potential. And it's nice to get data and not, just accept, well, there's people are just going to be in less. Who wants to do that? Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about the scope? What is the device really? How does it work? How is it different than others?
So we really decided from early on when we started thinking about how we're going to really develop our monitoring that it's got to be simple. Simple was the number one word across the board, right? Yeah. Just like, let's take a page like we all want to do from Apple. I want my 8-year-old patient to be able to pick this up off of the counter and with barely any instruction, understand inherently how to use it and be able to, in less than a minute, send me the orthodontist information that I need. Right.
I'd say the similar thing about websites. They should be very simple what you need to do and what the story is on your homepage. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. And so, what we developed was, again, exactly that, simplicity, right? So number one, it can't be multiple pieces, right? Now you got to get this piece from here, this piece from here. This one's doing this one's doing that. One piece design. So we worked with some of the best engineering firms, both in Tel Aviv and on the West Coast, to help develop this. And so it seems so simple, which I think the best inventions are stuff that everybody looks at and says, I could have done that, right? But
That's true. Yeah.
But nobody did, right? And this
Mhm.
is so, and it actually takes a lot of effort and a lot of thought and a lot of brain cells in order to achieve it in the first place, for then everybody else to, it clicks in place so quickly and they're like, yeah, duh, right? So the
Mhm.
scope is a one-piece design, attaches to your mobile device. That one piece gets into the mouth, so it is going to retract the cheeks, comfortable across the board for all patients. We actually did just design a pedo, what we call a scope mini,
Yeah.
because originally we were talking about aligners and braces and basically the core of your practice. And then we have a ton of doctors that are like, wow, this is so cool. I want to use it for observation for my early phase ones, like the little kids. And we're
Yeah,
like,
that makes
okay,
sense.
but then we need to get you a smaller scope. And
Yeah.
so very quickly, again, the team went back to the engineering team and said, hey, let's spin up this scope. And so we have a scope mini now as well. But so the scope is simple, something easy to use no matter what your age group is, but not just easy on the patient side, easy on the doctor and the team side as well. And obviously the scope is married to an app. The app, again, from simplicity's sake, it can't be this convoluted thing that you have to take time out of your practice to teach a patient how to do, right?
Oh,
And
absolutely.
so the app itself is built on something that every single patient, every single child that has a cell phone knows how to do, which is message, right? And so if you know how to use iMessage, you know how to use the Grin app, because it's all based on a messaging platform. And then obviously there are added bells and whistles. You can take selfies, you can take a scan with the Grin scope and communicate with your doctor back and forth. So simplicity was number one, ease of
Yeah.
use, of course, and something that the team didn't have to take a tremendous amount of time to actually educate the patient. And most importantly, something that the patients would use, right? One of the pieces of feedback we've heard about a lot of other monitoring solutions out there is that, expensive, and we'll talk about pricing in a minute, but we spend all this money on it, we give it to the patient, and the patients just don't do it. They're uncomfortable, they're bulky, they're difficult to use,
Yeah.
et cetera. And then on the doctor side also, it's not just about everything that we just talked about on the patient side, but I need to be able to give the doctor the real information. In other words, if I'm saying that I want to reach into my patient's mouth to the same level of precision and accuracy that if I had the patient in my chair, I can stick my fingers in their mouth, retract their cheeks, and look.
Yeah.
Then I need to create something where it's not just about getting a shot of their mouth from bicuspid to bicuspid. I want to be able to see to the back molar. I want to be able to see full occlusal views. As you know, if you're looking at crowding head on, you're not seeing it. When you look occlusally, that's where you can really see how, where the teeth are up to. And so that was really the other piece to this, where I was like, guys, we need to make sure that I'm getting all of the information, that I don't for a second feel like, ooh, I should get this patient in because I can't quite see something, right? I want to be able to see everything.
Oh yeah, what would be the point of that?
Exactly.
You need to be able to make a decision and get the data you need. It's amazing that we can minify this technology. I mean, that's kind of what I expect in 2021. Of course, there's still no flying cars, but I think it's great. It's a good example.
Oh, there are companies working on it.
Yeah. So I saw you won the AO 2021 Innovator Award. You want to talk about that a little bit? That's pretty awesome.
That was really exciting. No, I mean, I'm very thankful to them. They so far have been great to work with, a great partner. I was a little hesitant in my early days of Grin, knowing that Grin at some point wanted to get to the market and actually advertise to consumers, because our goal ultimately is to be able to shout from the rooftops to consumers, all of the things you're looking for, you can get from your local doctor, from your local orthodontist, right?
Yeah.
Be able to actually grab the consumer, acquire them, and put them in the chair of the orthodontist. And these are specifically consumers that are unfortunately right now running someplace else, right? To all the other DTCs. And everything that you talk about orthodontists that are hesitant to change, et cetera. Of course, some organizations within dentistry as well, very hesitant to be dealing with anything that has any shade of anything to the consumer. But the AO has been phenomenal about it. I must say that they get it. They get what's going on in the market. They get that there is a threat out there, and they understand that my team is really, truly only looking to be able to mitigate that threat and make sure